Kuwait City liberated as the Allied troops roll in. Iraqi soldiers give up the fight, but the war goes on. And Australia beats the West Indies in their first one-day international. Good evening. After 7 months of occupation, Kuwait City is once again flying its national flag, the capital now liberated by Allied forces. They swept in overnight to find that many Iraqi troops had already fled, leaving relieved Kuwaitis and a city devastated by war.
The liberation may have been quick, but there was no let-up in the fighting. As the Allies advanced along the coastal highway towards Kuwait City, they came under constant attack.
Gotten some mortar fire, some automatic weapons fire, some tank fire.
However, the Iraqis were heavily outnumbered and soon overrun. And after 42 days and nights of war, the Allies were finally pushing into Kuwait City. The American television networks were sometimes moving ahead of the liberating soldiers. The story unfolded live on America's CBS television network with reporter Bob McEwen.
Driving along the almost deserted highway that leads to Kuwait City, past burning oil wells and burned-out tanks, there was a sense of disbelief that we had left the war behind and might actually be able to drive right into the capital.
McEwen was traveling with the Allies' forward scouts. As he got closer to the city center, Kuwaitis lined the streets, giving victory signs, waving flags, and showing off the weapons the Iraqis had left behind.
The Iraqis ran away. They left everything. They left the machine guns. They left everything.
And then the moment the people of Kuwait had waited 7 months to see.
As we stand here, Kuwait City is a free city, and as far as these people are concerned, the Iraqi army is on its way out of Kuwait.
Overcome by their sudden freedom, they huddled around the American reporter, giving first-hand details of how they had suffered.
If you go to see the children, 8 years, 9 years, they hang them, they shoot them, because he writes Saddam, he writes something about Saddam.
Who are you?
I am a ward officer, Mossad Saleh from Kuwait. I have some American Marines here with me. We are going to get inside the American embassy. And we are waiting for you. Yeah.
The war is not over, and we're going to continue to attack and attack and attack.
Under presidential orders to stop the Iraqis withdrawing with their army intact, American and French forces were airlifted into valleys along the Euphrates River, cutting off escape routes from Kuwait, while U.S. tank divisions moved in to take on the Republican Guards dug in around the city of Basra.
Literally set up roadblocks. Let them through. You're welcome to go, but leave that artillery piece behind, leave that tank behind, leave that rifle behind. Then the world will see, it must be recorded by cameras, that Saddam Hussein has lost definitively.
It's the biggest 4th of July show you've ever seen. And to see those tanks just boom, and more stuff just keeps spewing out of them, and the shells flying on the ground, and they just become white hot.
Also today, many more Iraqis gave themselves up. More than 30,000 have now surrendered. For most, it was a moment of incredible emotion.
Get down. Down. All right. You're all right.
For this group, the terror was unmistakable as they feared the worst when ordered to kneel at gunpoint. Then relief as they realized they were safe. Allah Akbar, they chant, God is great. These prisoners say their officers deserted them as soon as the Allied attack began. For most, this is the first food and water they've had for days.
No one supports Saddam. No one supports them, except those people who get advantage of him. You know? No one supports him, but no one can say anything. Because if he say anything, he will be in a bad position.
For others, the realization that the war was over was too much to hold inside. For these Iraqis in the care of Egyptian forces, they were back with fellow Arabs, fellow Muslims. They were enemies, now they're friends. An Egyptian colonel whispering to a prisoner in pain from a head wound. It's all right, you are safe now. I am an Arab too. I am your brother. Robert Penfold, National 9 News, Saudi Arabia.
People strained to hear their leader through yet another air raid warning. Clearly the war was not yet over, so why the retreat? Special circumstances, Saddam said, citing the economic sanctions and the aggression of 30 nations. He claimed a moral victory. Gunfire in celebration of impending peace. But in Washington, George Bush said Saddam's retreat would not bring an end to the war.
Saddam's most recent speech is an outrage. He is not withdrawing. His defeated forces are retreating. He is trying to claim victory in the midst of a rout. And he is not voluntarily giving up Kuwait. We are not only on schedule, we're ahead of schedule. And no commander-in-chief has ever been so proud of America's men and women in uniform.
At the United Nations, Yemen and Cuba continued in vain to seek support for a ceasefire. And in Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev made his strongest criticism yet of the Allies' ongoing offensive.
Or we're going to decide everything in the future by force, and we're going to have a cult of force in international relations.
Saddam Hussein has now taken his people through 2 catastrophic wars. He gained a reputation but little else from the conflict with Iran, and now faces not just defeat, but humiliation. With his elite army demoralized and now all but defeated, the Allies hope Saddam will be overthrown. The problem is, who would take over, with Saddam's ruthless history of eliminating all potential challengers? Inside his own revolutionary council, few are seen as candidates, except perhaps senior party politicians like Aizat Ibrahim Ad-Duri.
If Saddam Hussein falls under a bus or in the Iraqi context, under a tank, Mr. Ad-Duri will take over all the positions of power that matter.
The Iraqis came to occupy the country with a determined policy of dismantling it totally, systematically, looting it.
There's a very strong commitment that we will try and deal as much as we can where we can find the equipment with our coalition partners.
But by far the greatest challenge will be on the oil fields.
Well, see, most of the wells in Kuwait, like Saudi, Latimer and limestone, and they'll flow for 100 years if you don't stop them.
Red Adair has been given the job of putting out the fires in hundreds of oil wells, many of them releasing high levels of toxic gases, a problem that highlights the long-term environmental legacy for the Middle East and the world. Jim Whaley, National 9 News.
Of course, air supremacy, as I've just mentioned, is a key to the successful execution of the land battle with a minimum of casualties, and the weather conditions are not ideal at the moment.
When the sun comes up, the question in my mind will be, will the enemy still be there? But it had gotten dark and both sides broke off, and I would tell you that the U.S. forces in that area are getting pretty tired right now. They've been attacking constantly for 3 days. There have been tank engagements with the Republican Guard. In each case, the result has been a very positive one for us. Whether there'll be a major tank engagement with them, whether they'll come out with large numbers of tanks, is something that lies in the future. I don't know. All things are possible. Some of them are more difficult than others.
Let me ask you, first of all, when did you have a sense that the ground war had begun and that the liberation of Kuwait was going to begin, Sheikh Ali?
Well, it's about 2 days ago when the Iraqis there was a lot of troop movement inside the city. And all of a sudden at night, when dawn came on, there weren't any of them around, mainly in the residential areas. So we got the idea that something is happening. And after we heard about the withdrawal, people got out of the houses because nobody dared to get out of the houses for the last week because they were picking them out of the street. So, and as we went on around the areas, we got the impression that something is happening. And we got control of the areas one by one.
The command of these units doesn't know what's going on around it because they're not capable of calling their commands and find out about the overall results.
We still don't have a very clear sense of the scale of Iraqi soldier casualties. What reference has there been to those war casualties and battle casualties?
Well, it was asked of the commanders what's happened to these hundreds of thousands of troops that we've been hearing about. And the general said, well, there are only 3 options. They've either deserted, being killed or taken prisoner. Now, given the fact that there are only 50,000 or so POWs, that by inference suggests that the toll could be quite massive.
Trevor, thanks very much indeed.
This is not a time of euphoria, certainly not a time to gloat, but it is a time of pride. Pride in our troops, pride in the friends who stood with us in the crisis, pride in our nation, and the people whose strength and resolve made victory quick, decisive, and just. And soon, we will open wide our arms to welcome back home to America our magnificent fighting forces. No one country can claim this victory as its own. It was not only a victory for Kuwait, but a victory for all the coalition partners. This is a victory for the United Nations, for all mankind, for the rule of law, and for what is right.
Among Mr. Bush's conditions for the ceasefire, and now we cross to Mr. Hawke in the Parliament House.
Security Council are being suspended at this moment. Terms have been set down for a formal ceasefire, which we hope can be concluded without delay. All that can prevent this suspension becoming permanent is a refusal by Saddam Hussein to comply with the totally reasonable conditions laid down by the Allies. On my instructions, the Chief of the Defence Force has directed Australia's task force in the Gulf to suspend hostilities under the terms announced by President Bush this afternoon. Speaking for Australia and for myself, this is a moment of great relief and hope, of great pride, and also of great sorrow. We are sad that it has been necessary to resort to war to right the wrong perpetrated by Saddam Hussein on the 2nd of August when he invaded Kuwait. But we are glad that the world has stood united against his act of aggression, even to the ultimate sanction of war. We are glad that the United Nations has stood true to its principles and that it has succeeded through the Security Council in applying those principles in action. We are proud of the contribution we in Australia have made, and especially, of course, the contribution of members of our Australian Defence Forces to this great international undertaking. And today, above all, we rejoice that the war has been won quickly and with so few casualties to our allied forces. For the people of Kuwait, this victory brings to an end over 7 months of occupation, marked by persecution, atrocities, and destruction. We share their joy in liberation. For Iraq also, the price has been terrible. We do indeed grieve for the people of this tragic country, and we hope that they can quickly bind their wounds and rebuild their nation as a respected and as a responsible member of the international community. We must understand that the end of the war is not the end of the crisis. Much remains to be done to bring stability to the Gulf and to bring a wider, durable peace to the Middle East. The end of the war should bring new opportunities to address these old problems. Our hope is that the sense of commitment and of cooperation, which so many nations in the Middle East and throughout the world have shown in confronting Saddam Hussein, will be shown again in meeting the challenges ahead. Australia will play its part in making sure that this victory is a victory for all people in the Middle East. But it is more than that. It is a victory for people everywhere who would live in peace. It reaffirms the fact that the world is indeed a world community, that the world community is united in its commitment to resist aggression, that the world will continue to resist aggression,